Tom, thank you so much for being here. The last time I talked to you, you were running for president, actually. So great to meet you in person again.
Madison, nice to see you.
So obviously, heels of this election, the market saw best post-election rally ever. I know that you care a lot about the climate. You call yourself a climate investor, not a climate activist, but you are an investor. Do you think that investors are really that better off now than they were 4 years ago?
Than 4 years ago, because 4 years ago we were right in the middle of COVID and the world was a very different place. Do I think that we're better off as a society than we were at the start of COVID? Yes. Do I think that there's no such thing as a normal time in investing? Markets fluctuate all the time and sometimes they fluctuate wildly. And I think as an investor, a big part of the job is to look through the noise and try and see what's going on in the real world and not necessarily listen to all the hype on, that the media is putting out.
So what's the noise right now versus real world?
Well, I think in terms of clean energy, what we're seeing is very dramatic growth around the world of clean energy. Just to give you some quick statistics, I think over the last 4 years, solar has multiplied 4x. I think that EVs in the last 4 years have multiplied 5x. I think the cost of batteries in China went down 50% last year. I think solar around the world costs have gone down 60% over the last 4 years. We're seeing a transition happening around the world really fast. Last year, new electricity generation, 2023, 86% renewable. So whatever you read in the media, what is happening is a dramatic transition in the way we generate and use electricity.
So I want to get your perspective on what's going to happen next here, because the US is already at peak production and we just elected Mr. Drill, Baby Drill. Where does that leave energy?
So, drill, baby drill, let's talk for a second about oil. Oil production in the world is something like 102 million barrels a day. The United States produces about 13.5 million barrels a day. We're the biggest oil producer in the world. We're the biggest oil producer in history. We're talking about going from 13.5 million barrels a day to 14 million barrels a day. In the context of the world, in the context of our economy, that is not anything dramatic. So when we don't have a shortage of oil and gas in the world. In fact, we have a glut of oil and gas in the world. We are not going to get rid of oil and gas because we run out of oil and gas. We're in the middle of a transition to much cheaper energy sources. And that is something where the energy sources dependent on technology are getting cheaper, they have gotten cheaper, and they will continue to get cheaper. And so the differential in terms of cost is just going to widen. Let me say one last thing. I wrote a book that came out about 5 or 6 months ago that said, cheaper, better, faster, how we win the climate war. The truth is people are going to be self-interested when they buy things. They're going to be self-interested when they purchase energy. They're going to be self-interested when they buy cars and heat pumps. And basically, we're in a business of competition between different sources. And you can see that some of those sources are growing really, really fast.
Part of the thesis of cheaper, better, faster is this idea of free markets. Let the market do what it's going to do. If you make cheap, better, faster products, consumers will flock to it, right? Sounds like a great capitalist, Tom. But how does that work then under changing regulatory backdrops? Does it matter who's the president under that thesis?
Well, I think to a very large extent, it doesn't matter. And let me give you an example of this. I think if there's a state in the country whose legislators have been antagonistic to renewables, it's Texas. Texas has been the center of the oil and gas business in the United States, maybe in the world, for a really long time, and they're very proud of it, and they feel as if that's an important part of their identity and their economy. Over the last 3 or 4 years, Texas has tripled their amount of solar. It's supposed to go up another 35% this year. Texas is by far the biggest wind energy producer in the United States. The top 4 states with wind energy are all deep red states. Why are they doing that? Because of the money, because it's a good deal. And so they can talk about whatever they want to talk about, but the fact of the matter is they're not having brownouts and blackouts during their extreme weather events. And why is that? Solar and wind. So when we look around the world and you see 86% of new electricity generation in the world is renewable, is that because people in Vietnam are saying, we should spend more on energy so people in Florida aren't flooded out? No, they're saying it's cheaper. This is a good deal for us. Let's do what, everyone is self-interested in this. So when we look around the world, this is business. This is economics. Nobody gets to, gets away from the rules of markets and prices. And that's what we're seeing in this world. And when you look forward, the question you have to ask is, does the new technology win over time? And you can look back hundreds of years and the new technology works over time. We're not sitting here going like, I have a big store of whale blubber and I can sell it to you cheap. No one's in the market for whale blubber.
Disappointing for investors out there listening, Tom. So I guess I wonder then, thinking from a global perspective, if you're worried at all that a Trump presidency could put the US behind on climate tech moving forward, and Trump doesn't like when other countries beat the US, so what will that do to legislation moving forward?
Well, the United States has traditionally been a business and economic leader. We've been innovators, we've been in the front of technologies. That's been true, and that is true. And so when we look forward, the country that is focused on the energy transition by far the most is China.
Right.
And so when we think about who we're in competition with from an economic basis, from a world leadership basis, from a finance basis, the country that we're in competition with is China. And so for us to miss this transition and not go all in on it seems to me to be a huge miss, because there is gigantic opportunity here. And there is gigantic opportunity for Americans. And some of these things we're not going to be leaders in, but an awful lot of them we definitely can be leaders in. And I think it's really important as we move to a time of what I think of as energy abundance. A lot of cheap energy around the world from various sources. Are we going to be able to drive that, profit from it, and use it to both build our economy and to remain what we are, which is the leading country in the world?
Well, investors are really bullish on nuclear energy as an additional energy source. How are you thinking about nuclear? We know Vistra beat out NVIDIA as the best performing company in the S&P so far this year, a huge superlative. What are you thinking? Are you investing?
So I think when you look at nuclear, let's just take a step back. There are two different kinds of nuclear energy that people are talking about in terms of the nuclear renaissance. One is the old-fashioned kind of nuke, which is fission. Mm-hmm. And people are talking about fission has three problems: cost, toxicity. The nuclear waste traditionally has been toxic for 100,000 years and really dangerous, and disasters. And people are building small modular nuclear reactors as a way to get away from toxicity, to get away from disasters, and to hopefully bring down costs. Let's see if they can do it. It's, since 3 Mile Island, when people have tried to build new fission nuclear plants in the United States, they've gone way over budget. They've produced very expensive energy. But if it does work, that is cheap, no CO2 emissions energy that is baseload. So that's something people really want. The second kind of new nuclear that people are looking at is fusion, which is basically recreating the sun on the planet Earth. In order to do it, people think you have to get the reactor to 100 million degrees. Not easy. I invested in this personally in 2006. I believe that if it in fact happens, this is something that will be transformational. It is a very hard science and engineering task. There are about 72 companies trying to do it. 12 of them people take quite seriously, 5 or 6 they take very seriously. Let's see what happens. There's a lot of optimism in that industry that in fact over the next decade we'll see the commercial sale of fusion nuclear power. If that's true at a respectable price, that's a game changer. But as in all technologies, there's a lot, there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip.
So where are you putting your money in nuclear, if at all?
No, we feel as if in looking at the energy transition, there's no question this is happening globally. I don't mean to be rude, but this is happening and it's going to continue to happen, and this is a huge trend. And we think that that's a huge tailwind to investing. But as an investor, you also have to ask yourself, over what time are you investing? What are the risks you want to take? What is a good investment? Just being part of the energy transition doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good investment. And so what we've said is we want to be invested in things that will have an impact this decade, which honestly, I think you'd have to be awfully aggressive to think that fusion will. We've looked seriously at fission, but as these things happen, we're going to react to the pricing and the opportunities and the risks.
Do you like the 3 Mile Island deal, Microsoft and Constellation?
I really don't know enough about it. What I think it says is this: AI is going to demand, and data centers are going to demand, significant increases in electricity generation. People want it to be base load because you need absolute certainty that your plant is up and running 24/7, 365. Nuclear, as I said, is a no emissions type of generation. And so if you look at the big, people trying to win in AI, excel in AI, build huge data centers, they also are serious, and Microsoft is definitely really serious about their responsibilities in terms of emissions and climate. So they're willing to go and try something that's difficult to do and maybe controversial to do, and unclear exactly how expensive it's going to be in order to meet what they see as their obligations as a responsible corporate citizen, and also their absolute determination to be competitive and do the best job.
You teed up my chart perfectly, Tom, because Torsten Slot crunched the numbers on this over at Apollo, our parent company, and he said that we're going to need an additional 18 gigawatts of power by 2030 in order to meet the demands that have been, the energy demands that AI requires here. If nuclear, it doesn't sound like you think that's a great solution, then what is the solution to the AI demand for energy?
Well, I think when you look at the growth in clean energy that is base load, let's talk about it. So wind and solar are by far the cheapest sources of electricity in the United States and around the world. That's why they're 86% last year of new electricity generation was wind and solar, because it's by far the cheapest and getting cheaper. The issue is about base load. That is it something you can call on all the time? Obviously, sometimes the wind doesn't blow. Sometimes the sun doesn't shine. And the batteries that we have right now don't have very long duration. So in fact, people don't feel that combination really provides 24/7, 365. So when you look at the base load, what's traditionally been base load in the United States has been probably coal, natural gas, hydro, and a little bit of geothermal, which is digging it down into the world for hot water and steam. So as we look forward, what are the things that people are looking forward to as baseload? And nuclear, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So people talk about nuclear, they're also talking about a much more advanced and possibly large part of geothermal. Basically, instead of going down 500 feet to get hot water and steam, which has no emissions, going down 5,000 feet, where there's a lot more, where the drilling techniques are really taken from oil and gas, and you can get baseload clean electricity. The question is, how much of that is there? That's a real change. So we've got a couple new kinds of nuclear, we've got geothermal, we've got people trying to redo the old nuclear plants, to resuscitate the old nuclear plants. And then we've got people who are saying, let's use natural gas, which is available, we know it works, we know it's a baseload fuel, and let's then figure out how to offset that. That's where we're going.
That sounds to me like we're not actually getting better for the climate, though. If we keep using energy the same way we always have and then put a nuclear Band-Aid on top.
I don't think that's true. I think what we're going for, when I look at this, I think we're going to a place of abundant, cheap, renewable energy. And the question is, how fast do we get there? I think deeper geothermal, so-called enhanced geothermal, is a big deal. I hope that some of these nuclear things will turn out to be relatively inexpensive. I also believe we're going to have a couple of revolutions in batteries in the next 10 years, that we're going to see not just the prices have gone down incredibly substantially, and they'll go down a heck of a lot more. It's not about cost. It's really about duration. that as batteries become much longer duration, in fact, they get you to that 24/7, 365. And so I think we're going to have a couple of revolutions in battery duration over the next decade that are going to take us really from hours to days and weeks. And I think at that point, you're talking about a completely different question. People are focused on this. I think we're looking very much in the short time frame, but really, I think this is something where the world is focused on it. People are doing a lot of experiments. People are spending a lot of money. And I believe the cost of generating electricity is going to go down a lot.
So for investors who have that long time horizon and who really care about the climate, what would you advise them? Where should they be putting the money where their mouth is?
So the energy transition, the response on climate really goes through virtually every kind of investment strategy. So I believe that there is an investment strategy around real estate where you can get better returns by reacting to this problem, that it's not about being nice, it's not about making concessions, it's about being smart and getting better returns. I believe that that's true in credit. When I sit here and think about new companies, the question is, what are the companies that over a long period of time are going to generate real compounding good returns? And those are not always the companies that people talk about in the headlines. I think there's a real sense around climate. People think that the breakthroughs in the technologies are going to be gadgets. So it's going to be solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps, electric vehicles, batteries, things you can touch, because to a large extent, things you can touch are what's causing the emissions. I think there's going to be a whole other part of this economy absolutely relevant to climate where returns are going to be really good. Information, agriculture, sequestration. You know, everybody's focused on very specific parts of this, and of course I think that's terrific. But from an investment standpoint, you have to ask yourself where are the good investment returns. You really can't bring just what is an impact attitude to this. The real question you have to ask is, this is business. I mean, I've been a professional investor for decades. If you want to get a good return, you've got to have domain expertise, really understanding what's going on in the ecosystem in the world. But also you have to be an old-fashioned, disciplined investor about getting returns and understanding what drives that and not getting carried away. And so when I look at this, I think there are lots of real opportunities, but they aren't necessarily the thing that's on the front page of the New York Times.
So it sounds like Tesla is not a bull case then, under that investment thesis.
Well, I think that Tesla has just had a huge screaming run. So I was looking at it this morning. I think it was trading at 93 times earnings.
Yeah.
And most people don't think that's that cheap.
Well, yeah, it's not. It's 93 times earnings. Okay, so no on Tesla. I do, on the topic of Tesla, though, in our final minute together, I want to get your thoughts on Elon Musk and a Trump administration. Do you anticipate Elon maybe moving Trump on climate?
I really don't know. I really don't know. And I think that to a very large extent, what is going to drive climate is markets and prices and, cheaper, faster, better. Mm-hmm. I think the question for the United States that I do think is really interesting to me is, how are we going to participate as a country? Not how are we going to, the rules within the United States of America, which I think are going to be driven largely by just normal business, markets, prices. To me, the question is, how do we participate in the world? Because this is a global problem. The United States is the so-called indispensable country. If we want to see international standards, international cooperation, it's very hard to see it without us. And if it does happen without us, and the markets are going to move with or without us. But if we want to see global cooperation, if we're not leading it, that means China's leading it. If we're not pushing on this from an economic and business standpoint, that means China's pushing on it from an economic and business standpoint. So from my standpoint, the real question is America going to be a leader in the world, or are we basically going to withdraw and say we're going to just look after ourselves and not participate with other people? In my mind, from the standpoint, as an American, I would like to see us continue to be a world leader, both from a business standpoint, an economic standpoint, and also a value standpoint.
Tom Steyer, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Madison, thank you.